So, Power Quest. My first game as a member of Yokoi Kids. Now I knew nothing about this game going in except obviously it was on Game Boy, obviously. This is a Game Boy Game of the Month Club after all. So I've never even heard of this game, never played it, knew absolutely nothing going in. And while setting up, I saw the demo going on in the background, and only then did I realize that it was a fighting game. I have nothing against fighting games, I'm just not very good at them, but there are some I enjoy. The common thread for all those is they're on the actual home console or in the arcade, so there's an actual controller with enough buttons to be able to play effectively. That luxury does not come with the Game Boy, however. As you know, there are only two actual buttons, so it kind of kneecaps what you can do while playing. Also important to note is this is the first fighting game that I've actually played on the Game Boy. So, with talking about the game in general, Power Quest was developed by Japan System Supply, published by Capcom and Sunsoft, I'm sure you know who those guys are, and released on the Game Boy in late 1998. Power Quest is said to combine elements of role-playing and fighting, though it seems like the role-playing aspect is really all that unnoticeable, as it's really just limited to buying more powerful parts for your robot. The main focus is on the fighting, which again I was a bit skeptical with when it comes to doing a fighting game on the Game Boy, but to my surprise it actually functions better than you would expect. Like with any fighting game, if you know the various button combinations, then you could perform a wide array of special moves, and to compensate for how few buttons there are on the Game Boy, that just means there are less moves for each character, which is fine. This doesn't really hinder the game in any way being on a handheld as opposed to a home console. The control can sometimes feel a little slippery though, as a slight tap on the D-pad can send your character flying, and also while trying to perform a combo, your finger can slip and either cause your character to duck or jump when you don't want them to, possibly leaving you vulnerable to a counterattack. Now I'm not going to rag on the graphics too much, as this is Game Boy, or in this case Game Boy Color, and for the time they were good, but I don't think they hold up too well. It's also kind of a shame that there really isn't that big of an environment to explore. I mean, you have the city, which is the main hub of the game, then some different buildings you go into, such as your home, the shop, or various places to battle against other people, and a screen for the battle itself. So in all, that's only 4 types of screens you're going to see over the course of the game, which really isn't that much. One of my biggest issues with this game, though, is as simple as it should be, they don't really make it easy for you to figure out how to progress. I mean, when I did play it earlier, I got a little ways in, but that was more by luck and not really knowing what I was doing. Only when I looked it up online did I find that it says you have to fight X number of battles before being able to progress in the story. The part I cleared only took about 10 or so before the game allowed me to move on, but the next part I got to said it would take about 30 or so before I can continue, which I think is a little overboard. Granted, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, just do 30 battles, which I think is a bit excessive and kind of a poor reason to lengthen the game. I believe you should just be able to beat a set number of people, maybe 5 or 10 for example, and then progress with the story. My other key gripe is trying to acquire upgrades for your fighter. Early on, the level 1 tier products are only 1,000, and you can get 1,000 gold from a few key fights, so that's easy enough. But then the level 2 tier upgrades were running about 3 grand each, and from what I read in the walkthrough, not only are there level 3 tier upgrades, but they kinda recommend them as well, which means you're gonna have to grind for them, as I do not know which ones are the best for you to get, so it's kind of a crapshoot your first time through. It does seem like it will take an excessive amount of time if you want to get all the upgrades, as well as most of the early battles didn't really yield that much money. On rare occasions they will, but that means unless you know which upgrades will work best, you'll kind of be spending a lot of time just grinding battles for loot. One more nitpick I have is with the lack of a battery backup. There were many Game Boy games of this time that allowed for being able to save your game, including Pokemon and Legend of Zelda, so why not this one? Instead, it sticks to the method of a password system, which seems to change every time you do something. So when you're ready to shut the game off, you're going to need to make sure you write it down lest you lose your progress. And it's not the most overly complicated password system. I mean, a standard letter one with a 12-digit combination, but this again warrants, why couldn't they just do a save system, or at the very least make the password a little shorter? I mean, I do understand that it does keep track and has to change the password after everything you do, whether it be a battle or otherwise, so that would probably be the only reason for long passwords to begin with, is my guess. Overall, it's not a bad game, especially for one who didn't know what to expect going in. And again, I'm not much of a fighting game buff, but for what it was, it played fairly well, and I do like the inclusion of a system to try and make yourself stronger, even if it is a little bit flawed. What I would change is making it so you don't need to fight so many battles to be able to advance the story, and either lower the cost of parts or maybe make it so you can earn a little bit more from battles. Either one would suffice. I would say for a fighting game enthusiast looking for a game that fell under the radar, to give this one a shot, as it would definitely appeal to that fan base. And for one that came out on the Game Boy with the limited controls, I think it handles fairly decently.